Charlie Bravo, ground crash runway 10.
Taxi 10, Charlie Bravo. Tower, Cirrus 77, Charlie Bravo, Charlie 1. Complete.
Cirrus 7 Charlie Bravo, proceed on course runway 10, clear for takeoff.
Proceed on course runway 10, clear for takeoff, 7 Charlie Bravo. Denver approach, Cirrus 787, Charlie Bravo.
Charlie Bravo there.
7 Charlie Bravo is 5 miles east of Centennial. I'd like to do a couple practice approaches into front range, starting with the ILS 35. Please, I have the weather at front range.
Charlie Bravo, radar contact, flighting 080 and squawk at 0403.
0800403, 7 Charlie Bravo.
Charlie Bravo, thanks. Your radar contact, the altimeter is 2992, flighting 090.
090, 7 Charlie Bravo.
What do we do after this?
I'm sorry, say again.
What do you want to do after this?
After the ILS, I'd like to do ONAV to, for the GPS to 35.
You can climb out to the east.
Climb out to the east, 7 Charlie Bravo.
Charlie Bravo, flighting 120, and wide down just a bit.
120, 7 Charlie Bravo.
Bravo, I still show you tracking about a 50 heading east.
Turning to 120, 7 Charlie Bravo.
7 Charlie Bravo, thanks. Flighting 140.
40, 7 Charlie Bravo.
Charlie Bravo, I'll come right back to the left-hand turn here shortly. One turn to the funnel, you can find that.
7 Charlie Bravo.
Charlie Bravo, turn left heading 020. You're 4 miles from Aries. Maintain VFR. Your practice approach is approved. Separate services will not be provided.
7 Charlie Bravo, left 020.
Bravo, on the go. You want to come back to Hermer and shoot the approach, is that correct?
I want to take a quick peek at this place. We ONAV to Avenue and then please to 7 Charlie Bravo.
Roger, plan a right turn out and change to advisors approved. Report your missed approach on this frequency.
Report to first to you, advisory frequency 7 Charlie Bravo.
Charlie Bravo, roger, your radar contact, maintain VFR, proceed direct tap now. Charlie Bravo, your practice approach is approved. Separate services will not be provided. Just advise me when you're on the inbound course. What we'd like to do after this. Roger. Not often you have the place to yourself. Charlie Bravo, it most certainly is. Bravo, say again. Charlie Bravo, roger. Need declaring an emergency. Charlie Bravo, roger. The airport's off your 10 o'clock in 8 miles. I got Denver to the northwest. Do you say your intentions? Charlie Bravo, radar contact lost.
Yeah, it's a little sobering to see how fast things can happen and deteriorate. So, Brooks had the experience of pulling the caps while you all are here to listen and then ask questions. Hopefully get a little smarter on what the caps is all about. Brooks has done flying with Independence Aviation for years. Flown with him. Better not with his pleasure. Brooks is one of those guys that when we fly together, I say, well, I really like that checklist. Can I borrow that from you? I really like the way you're doing that. So I've been flying 30 years and I'm still learning things from folks like Brooks. So he's an excellent pilot and very structured. And he called me in the morning with the caps full. I said, what? I just pulled the caps. I said, holy cow, you all right? Yeah, gotta go. I think you were still on the wing or something when you called me. So I'll let Brooks talk about his situation with you
purpose of this is to make sure that you understand what my mistakes were, so that you can avoid the same things and maybe avoid them earlier than I did. One of the only things that I did right in this event was the total cap. And I'll go through each of the mistakes and we'll recognize those and say, geez, this is going to be pretty stupid. But the purpose is to make sure that you understand the event, how quickly it unfolded, how close I was within 2 seconds of the ground when I didn't go, and that the parachute works remarkably well. So that's, this is from the accident report, the probable cause. These were my statistics at the time of the accident, 1,700 hours. I've flown about 9 times in the last 90 days. Prior to that, I have more than 1,000 hours in the Cirrus at that point, and 437 hours of instrument time. So I felt very proficient, very confident, very comfortable. I go out at night to practice instruments. Right here. Haven't recently, because there aren't a lot of clouds here. So this was my 5th night outing of this particular season. And I had just finished with Chuck my Cirrus recurrent training, and again, feeling very comfortable, which was actually part of the problem. And didn't have any trepidation about this. Like going out to do just some practice approaches. And it was a pretty nice day out. So, okay, next slide. Look at that. You're in control. So as you heard from the audio, I made one ILS approach. I'm now on my way back out to Avenue, ONAV to Avenue, to do the GPS back in. So here's where part of the problem starts, is that I should have been out here getting to Avenue instead of here, because this is setting up a really tight turn at Avenue. So, but again, I'm familiar with this. I've flown this approach 50 times. Part of the problem. And, but here's the sequence. I'm now cleared to Avenue, cleared for the approach, coming into Avenue at a pretty acute angle. The problem, actually, well, let me back up here. As I'm coming into Avenue, starting to make this very tight approach here, this tight turn, I got into a position where I was at about a 30-degree angle of bank to make the turn. Now I'm going outside of the approach track, thinking, oh, well, I'll just tighten up a little bit more. And at this point, in this turn, I decide, well, I'll just make it a couple approach. Oh, why not? And I reach down to the GPS and the couple to GPS to the autopilot. And I felt this, some acceleration and some noise. Heck is that? And I looked back over, whipped my head back over to the PFD, and it was all brown. Well, that's not right. No sky, and now I have instantaneous vertigo. So I'm in my right-hand turn. I'm looking down here, fiddling around with the avionics, and I just let the plane roll over. And then as it rolled through about 70 degrees, the nose dropped through. And now the whooshing noise was because I'm pointed almost straight down. So I make a couple adjustments, and nothing happens. Oh, this is really bad. And then ultimately pulled the caps because I knew that I was completely out of my element. But started too steep a turn, lack of attention on the primary flight display, and then the situation developed very, very rapidly. What was astonishing about this was how fast things went from a nice night instrument approach to a near-death experience in a matter of 4 or 5 seconds. So the time that you have to deal with these things isn't very long. And then, of course, the parachute is actually, as I found out with a close inspection, light and orange and not pretty blue like that. I landed in Kiowa Creek, about 20 miles south of Front Range, and the fellow in this house up here saw the actual caps pull and heard it and called 911. So by the time portion of this. The sheriff's department was already on its way. So this guy knew I was down. He cut a hole in his fence so they could get the emergency equipment in. But I'm down here in this depression, big, about a 20 or 30 foot deep hole, and my cell phone works. It doesn't work on I-25, but it works out here. So I'm talking to the 911 controller on my cell phone. Oh, that's pretty nice. So out in the middle of nowhere, no lights out there. It was a dark night. It was a night that was set up perfectly for instrument approaches because there are no ground references, no stars, no moon. Sun was not up yet. So I have this essentially black hole environment. Inside that black hole environment, once I became disoriented and unable to interpret what was happening on the primary flight display, then that coupled with the vertigo really put me in a precarious position. At the time of the CAPS pull, I was at 700 feet. Let me poke through these slides just a little bit to make sure that I'm not. I just want to make sure I'm not getting this. I'll explain the lessons learned here in just a second. So I'm down here at the bottom of the creek. The airplane landed directly on its nose. During the CAPS pull vent, I was now inverted going straight down at 190 knots. So the 133 is the spec on the parachute. This deployed at 190 knots and stayed hooked to the airplane. I was so low, though,
that was intentional.
Yeah, this is to create vertigo. So now, inverted CAPS pull, parachute comes out, the risers get tangled up in the left-hand door, and the reefing line cutter doesn't deploy. So the plane managed to obviously get slowed down, but it never got to a horizontal attitude as it's supposed to, because the time from the reefing line cutter is on a, according to the people who build the parachute, on a timer, and it cuts the reefing line. Is that right, John? Cuts the reefing line after 30 seconds?
Yeah, it lengthens the harness in the back after 8 seconds.
To drop the plane down to a level attitude. That never happened because we never got to the 30-second point. And so the plane descended down, essentially straight down into the ground, as opposed to level. And that was an interesting visual as the landing lights started to pick up the dirt, because I was thinking, gosh, this is nice, we'll just float down, we'll land and get out. And I looked at it, this is not right. And there's the dirt. And so it went right into the dirt and then flopped back on its back. These are obviously all the risers here in the parachute and shroud lines. And this was also entertaining in the dark, walking away from the aircraft through all the risers, trying to get out to where the rescue crew was coming in. Just more pictures of the harness straight into the ground here, and then which I think the impact point was that right over here. Ground's frozen, but the riser, the left-hand riser that goes up here to the firewall, was hung up in the door. And had there been a fire, it actually would have been a little bit difficult getting out of the airplane. And it just never fully deployed. So as I'm going down in my 20-second descent, there's this flapping noise on the left-hand side. Oh boy, I don't remember that in any of the videos. And thinking that maybe I had a chute that didn't fully deploy. So now I'm focusing on this flapping noise from my riser. Absolutely the wrong thing to be focusing on, because I've never secured the engine. Never turned off the power, the electrical system. Didn't do anything. I'm just sitting in there going down the parachute. No, there's a whole process of things that you have to do after the chute pull, as opposed to riding into the dirt. There are a number of things that have to occur. I exacerbated my series of mistakes by not doing that. Just more of this. This is I think probably the reefing line, John, is that maybe this is supposed to be extended and it never was, just because the sequence didn't have enough time to actually fire. Now, this is from the accident, the probable cause report. A couple very important pieces of this have to do with your discussions with the NTSB and the FAA, and I'll get to those in a minute. But keep in mind, you have essentially a flight recorder in your airplane, which the NTSB will come take, and they'll take it that day if they have somebody in town. Within 2 hours of my accident, the NTSB was in my airplane taking out my avionics and shipping them to Washington. So if you think that you're going to embellish a situation or you might be explaining something to them that's not potentially accurate, they will catch you because the stuff's in the airplane. And they just decode it, and there's all the parameters. So, their conclusion, obviously, was that I attempted to recover, obviously my attempt wasn't very good, from my unusual attitude. The vertigo was really disabling or debilitating. And realized at that point, of course, that there was nothing else I could do to save myself except the parachute. These are the gyrations, and we went through this in the simulator, and it's a scary deal to actually go back through this again in the simulator, and you're not going anywhere. Lots of gyrations. So as I rolled over, and then the nose pitched through, my one control input made the situation worse, so I pulled back on the stick, and so now it really pointed straight down. And I made one roll, which was probably the wrong way. And then a lot of this gyration comes from the actual parachute deployment itself, which is a very, very violent activity. But they confirmed, I told the guy I thought I deployed at 189 knots. So I was pretty close. This is really important, both for the FAA and the insurance company, is that what I told them happened really did happen, and that's what the MFD and the PFD, whichever one of those are extracting the data out of, told me. Failure to maintain control of the airplane, yeah, that's exactly right, exacerbated by spatial disorientation. Now, the lessons learned part of this, which I hope will be valuable to you. Prior to even getting in the airplane, I think it's important that anybody here had a capsule? Anybody ejected out of a military airplane? I think that it's very important to have in your mind what the scenarios are that would generate the need for a pull. When I first bought the Cirrus, I worked through the scenarios that if I'm in this, or this, I'm going to pull. It proved to be extremely valuable because there isn't time, in my scenario where it's only 2,000 feet AGL, there isn't time to go through that process. Oh, should I, let's see, what will the insurance company say? I don't want to deal with the NTSB. You're dead. So you've got to have the scenario, I'm suggesting, in your mind so that when that scenario develops, then arm goes up and the pull. It's not a debate about it, especially if you're as low as I was when the event occurred. If you're at 15 or 20,000 feet, you've got a little bit more time to think about things, different deal. Even though I was not able to recover from my unusual attitude, when the Skyfighters were here and they had the T-34s, I did unusual attitude recovery training with them. What that showed me was how fast a plane goes down when it's pointed straight at the ground. It's not something we do a lot of in general aviation, but during this unusual attitude recovery training, I was able to see how the rate of descent, how fast the rate of descent is. And so I knew I was at 2,000 feet AGL, and that I didn't have a lot of time. The safety pin was already out. If the pin, I don't know how many of you fly with the pin in, but I suggest that the pin should be out. The placard can be placed in behind the area where the handle is. That's a good idea because you don't have time, if you're low altitude, to pull the pin and then take the placard off, pull the pin, pull the handle. It's just boom. And the extra 2 seconds would have killed me. The turn at Avenue was obviously too steep. I was very comfortable out there, maybe even too comfortable. Oh, I know this approach, I know where I am, I've done this a bunch of times, I can just not pay a lot of attention to what I'm doing. And we look down here and fiddle around with my instruments, no problem. And too late, this decision should be made on the ground at Centennial. The pole itself is a very, and I do recommend take independents up on this idea of the $80 simulator to put yourself in this ugly inverted environment and pull the caps. And it's a very short, the pull stroke is only about 4 or 5 inches long, and there's no resistance. It's just hook. It's literally that motion. It's not difficult to get to the handle. It's not difficult, obviously, to pull it. The loud bang occurs, obviously, when the rocket goes off, and it's only about 2 seconds to when the deceleration starts. So it's really, really important when you're decelerating from 190 knots to 40 knots, about a 4 or 5 second time frame, that your harness actually be on and in the right position. The buckle of the harness be at the buckle of the belt. If it's up here, as I've seen some people fly around, then you're on the floor, and your problems are now even more exacerbated. So your harness should be properly adjusted and for your passengers as well. The 700-foot pole and the 190-knot combined pole, according to the ballistic recovery system, was the fastest, lowest pole that they documented that actually worked. And so the parachute was way over engineered, which was great, because when I looked at my airspeed, that's way above what the engineer said to do. Didn't have time to articulate all that, but it was one of these, wow, it's actually a different word. It stayed hooked to the plane, and went up and looked at it at the salvage yard in Greeley, and there was not even any damage to the little fitting, the beefy fittings where the risers hooked to the airplane. So I called the president of VRS and thanked him and his employees for their efforts. Now, after the pull, and this is the important thing to when you're visualizing this stuff or you're working in a simulator with one of the independence folks, very important that you actually, there are some other things, and they're in the checklist, that you should do, like turn the engine on, maybe turn the battery on, turn the fuel off. That's a good idea. And so I'm sitting in my seat listening to the flapping noise, not doing anything. The engine's still running here at about 2,200 RPMs. Oh, that's pretty stupid. And the briefing line cutter didn't fire again. We talked about that. The impact was at about 40 miles an hour. And another incredibly stupid thing I did was I was looking at the dirt, hit the ground. Oh, that's interesting. I guess we're all finished with this. I'm sitting in the air. I'm just sitting there. Oh, this is neat. I'm not on fire. Being sort of amazed that the plane had not caught fire. Chris, get out of the plane. And so I realized that, maybe I'll start turning stuff off. So I turned a couple things off, and it did not explode, fortunately. And then I tried to get out of the plane, but I couldn't get out the left side door because of the riser was. So it took a while to actually get the door open. But you should have in mind an idea of what you're supposed to do after the pull. And then, if you're on the ground, I suggest you get out of the plane. The cockpit there was zero damage to the cockpit. The firewall had been pushed back in, but all the other structure in the cockpit, very, very strong airplane. There was no damage inside the cockpit. The seat didn't come off, there was no buckling, there wasn't anything. It was completely intact. And the most amazing thing of the night, the cell phone action. So very handy to have your cell phone with you, because as some of you probably realize, which I did, when your ELT goes off, you can't use your radio on the emergency frequency, or at least with the old ELT that I had. So I couldn't call anybody on my handheld radio on the emergency line because the ELT was going on. Would have been pretty easy to reach in there and turn it off. You know, didn't do that either. So lots and lots of different things that throughout the process, the mistakes that I made. The NTSB and the FISDO were on the scene within 2 hours and wanted an on-scene interview and discussion. And while I was talking to the FISDO gentleman, the NTSB was over at the crash pulling out my avionics. A couple days later, the fellow from the FISDO called and gave me the choice of surrendering my license or maybe to come get that license. That's an interesting choice. So I went up to the FISDO, surrendered my license, and I strongly suggest the AOPA legal program. They did a great job. They provided me with an attorney's team on IGN. I suggest this as well, that you should consider getting representation during this event. If you don't need it for the FAA, it's a good idea to have one when you're talking with the insurance company. I had a great experience with Chuck and Bob during the post-crash rehabilitation of my skills, and so thank you for the efforts that you guys put forth and the support to prepare me for the FAA check ride. The FAA check ride turned out to be a non-event, which was good. I mean, we flew out, did some turns, flying descent, did an approach, and gave my license back. So this part was a lot less intense than license surrender fees. And then, of course, all the as you can imagine, problems with the insurance companies. Company started after that. Their objective was to take the lowest bid and fix the plane. And it seemed kind of odd that the plane was fixable. And so it took about 4 months to get through this process before they finally totaled the airplane. Now, the reason that, of course, I'm here today is because I told you the lessons learned are enormous. There are a number of mistakes that I made through this process. Too steep a turn at Avenue. Made the decision too late to couple the approach. Paid too much attention to my instruments, to my avionics, and not my instrument. Then, once I was inverted, again, right decision was to pull the caps. I made a couple control input errors because I was completely disoriented. But after in one of those things that I didn't do when I looked at all the ground, which looking at the ground, pulled power off. I never pulled power off during this event. So I'm now upside down, going straight down with power off, but at least at approach speed. And so that really exacerbated the situation. And then not going through a systematic shutdown of the airplane as it was descending with the parachute, and then not getting out of the airplane. So these are those are the things that I want to actually in part reiterate. The situation goes downhill. The situation goes downhill in a hurry. From the time that I started or heard this acceleration, it was about 5 seconds that I had now lost most of my safety margin. I was down now. I descended about 1,700 feet. So it's a quick progression once you get into this position, especially if you're not reading the instruments correctly. It's very fast. I had 2 more seconds. I was going down at 289 feet a second. So when you're going almost straight down at 190 knots, you're eating up your safety margin pretty quickly. Then so the decision has to be made pretty quickly. 2 more seconds, I would have been in the dirt. Parachute about 20 seconds under the parachute. So it happens quickly. You have to have those scenarios, and I would suggest that you have the scenarios in mind of what you think is a CAPS event, and don't hesitate to pull. Don't worry about the FAA, the insurance company. Worry about yourself and the family member. One of the most poignant moments during the post-crash event is when I was on my cell phone talking to my wife, and the sheriff deputy came up and said, "I'm glad you're talking to her. I'm not talking to her." And I thought, that's a very good point. Is that helpful? Does that make some sense and some lessons learned? So think about the scenarios in advance. And don't hesitate to vote. And don't make all these 7 or 8 mistakes. I mean, this looks like the accident report you read the whole magazine. Here's the chain of events. If he had stopped doing any of these stupid things anywhere along here, it would have been a rough place. But once I became converted, that was the show for me. So, thank you. I was on ONAV. They had already cleared me to navigate the avenue, and so I was cleared for the approach, ONAV to avenue, and so I just set up the GPS for that approach and was flying to avenue, got to avenue at that bizarre angle, and made a exactly, because that's what set up the roll, was the too steep a turn in avenue. Stay at the 20 degrees, that's what everybody's taught in instruments, that's what you should stay at. I violated that, and that was what precipitated the rest of the catastrophe. Yes, sir.
Prior to this step, have you ever experienced further fear in
I have
how did you know? How did you further
complete mental debility. It was completely debilitating. And so I was not processing information. I couldn't interpret what the instrument was telling me. I made incorrect control inputs. So it was probably after the event that I realized that what that was a serious, instantaneous vertigo onset set up by this head whipping back to the head, which started all the ear stuff, combined with just the fear and the confusion and no way to recover visually looking out the window of the cockpit. No ground references, no moon, no stars, which is nice.
Can you guess as time from the onset of the window until you actually made the decision?
4 seconds. Oh yeah, that was quick. Once I realized that my control inputs were meaningless, and I looked at the airspeed, and I knew that I was only at a couple thousand feet to start with, and I don't know what my altitude was. I wasn't reading the instruments at that point, but I knew that I was incapacitated mentally, and that my only hope was I've got to pull and hope that it stays hooked to the earth. Other questions? Yes, sir.
In terms of the ALPA legal and dealing with the FAA, insights?
Yeah, it's a very good question. The more of the insights on the dealing with the FAA in advance of an accident. One of the advantages that I had is that John was in charge of the maintenance on my airplane. So it was pristine and all the records were accurate. My credentials were up to date. My training was up to date. All of those things are vital prior to the accident, because the first thing that the FSDO starts looking at are the logs, my credentials, my training, and everything related to compliance with the regulations. So I didn't have to get into a legal beef with the FAA because I wasn't trying to defend anything that we had done. Maintenance was right on. Everything was exactly as it should be. Big lesson learned for this is that you have to, in probably all do this anyway. But all of those little pieces have to be in place. And then FSDO and the FAA sort of become a non-event. The big legal activity was the activity with the insurance company and the battle of is it total or is it not total? And that's where the AOPA legal people came in. I talked with Steve about the surrender process, and he said, well, it's your choice. Same choice that this would be. You can come up here or we'll come down there. So he just said, well, no. At some point you're going to have to surrender. So you might as well just go take it up and give it to them, because those are the same people that are going to give you the check back. So there's no point of having an adversarial relationship. And as it turned out, the nice young fellow, if we didn't see eye to eye during the surrender process, was the same guy who gave the check back, and it turned out to be the president. Anything else? Yes.
Sure. I think that we're inertia after the issue is not a person finds itself on the issue. It's a shock. But my question for you is, you had thought of the scenarios of shoot. Had you also carried through that process in the shoot issue, how to shoot it, like the rule aircraft, or in other words, did you guys continue to carry over your treatments that were not happening in an emergency situation like this one?
I hadn't thought about it. And so it's a very good question. And I had thought about the full scenarios and gone through the motion of what the full was. I was in a motion-based simulator in Las Vegas and I tried that. And, well, that's very simple. But had not been done any visualization or simulator work of post-full activity. Power's off, fuel's off, electrons off. I mean, it's pretty simple. If you aren't just sitting there thinking about whether your parachute is actually full. But that's a good point. Either simulator or visualization are very helpful. Yes, sir.
You said something, I'm not that familiar with the CAPS, but you said something about the safety. You had the safety pin out already and the placard or something away.
Yeah, that
What does the Cirrus manual suggest?
actually,
The Cirrus manual says take it out, but we've actually seen some clients, students that leave the darn pin in.
So that's like one of the before takeoff checklists.
Oh, absolutely,
Just take the pin out.
absolutely, absolutely.
And what Rex is talking about is this placard here. A lot of Cirrus owners will put it back up where it came from, covers the handle. So then you would have to take this off first to get to the handle and then pull. It may not come out as good as you did without this being in the way. It is a placard, so Cirrus, and they say it has to stay attached to the airplane. So when you come up with it, you just put it back on the last two pieces of Velcro. So it's hanging from the back and it's not in the way. It's still on the airplane, but it's not in the way. So I remember one thing Rich told me when he pulled the chute because we were going so fast. He said stuff went flying everywhere. And so I can imagine this is probably going to go that way. So to be able to take this off and start reading it, I could find it. So you might want to know the steps that go next. But again, as you're suggesting, you're almost in a shock situation. So think about, well, let's see, now what's the next step in the process? Brains and that doesn't work that way.
So it's like what you're doing,
yes.
buying your Cirrus, your insurance money.
No, the last time I flew was when the FAA checked out with the license. And so I have same question from your perspective. We did this presentation with the first one on the flight switching aspect. But my intention was, I was so angry at having to surrender something I worked so hard for. And I thought, oh, that. Ran over and got Chuck and Bob and got the school back up and got back. And
the hell am I doing up here?
You're still flying the airplane that has an antenna
It's a remarkable tool. The Cirrus building here. It is. I wouldn't be dead without it. But it's why I love it. It's not in the normal, especially people who flown non-parachute equipped airplanes. You're not in that constant mindset. Chuck has got some great graphics, and I'm eating up Chuck's time here. It almost has to be one of the first emergency thoughts, as opposed to, geez, I've tried everything else, now I'm going to deploy. And I was in an outrage situation a couple years ago where it wasn't on my, how am I getting out of this checklist? I was going to turn around, I was going to go north and south, or any number of other things, and I didn't think, gosh, that's it. And so if you just continue to think about it, work on your scenarios, spend some time in the simulator to actually make the pull, get comfortable with it, it's a tool. It's a tool that should be, you should not be reluctant to use it. The president of DRS had an interesting comment. He said, what's it going to hurt? You're in a bad situation. His example is you bounced your landing, and now you're heading off to the hangars. Well, why not pull? And just because it will slow in a 4 or 5 second, maybe 8 second period of time, I went from 190 knots to 40. That's pretty good. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brooks.